Hello again and welcome back to the Meeting Point English for another grammar lesson. And in this lesson we're discussing contrasting and concession. We'll be looking at words like although and how it can be used, what structures follow it. And when I'm describing although, the same rules will apply to words like though or even though. We use those expressions in exactly the same way. When I describe despite, the same rules will apply to in spite of. And with however, the same rules will apply to words such as nevertheless, even so, nonetheless, etc. But I'll be focusing on the structures which follow although, despite and however. So let's look at although. Although it was raining, we went to the beach. Here's another example. Although he had studied, John still failed the exam. These are the two stories that we'll be working with to look at the different structures that follow these kind of words. So you'll see with although we have a phrase like it was raining. That has a noun and a verb and works as an independent statement. I can say it was raining and it makes sense, just those words alone. The same with he had studied. Okay, now this is a complete clause which functions with although. Okay, so although it was raining, we went to the beach. Although he had studied, John still failed the exam. Although I had no money, I still went out on Saturday. Although she was not hungry, she ordered a meal, etc. Let's look at despite. Now this sentence is incorrect. The full clause he had studied does not go after despite. Okay, this is something very important that you have to learn. Despite does not go with the full clause. Usually despite will go with an ing verb. Okay, despite studying, John still failed the exam. Despite is followed by the ing form of the verb. Now if you want to use the complete clause, you need to introduce it, because after despite you can put a noun. So sometimes we'll use this structure. Despite the fact that he had studied, John still failed the exam. So you see we're introducing he had studied with the fact that. So that's the only way you can use the full clause, with that introductory phrase. Despite the fact that he had studied, John still failed the exam. Now let's look again at the ing form of the verb. Despite studying, there's the first part of the sentence. John still failed the exam. Now you see in the first part of the sentence we've got a verb, studying. We have no agent for the verb. There is no subject there. So we presume that in the second part where it says John still failed the exam, John must be the subject of that verb. We presume. Okay? Now look at this sentence. Despite failing, the teacher was not angry. Now, if we know that we're talking about John, and John failed the exam, maybe there wouldn't be a problem. But some people might see this sentence and it is a bit ambiguous, because John is not mentioned in the sentence anywhere. We might know that it's John we're talking about, but anyone else might come to this sentence and see, despite failing, the teacher was not angry. And it looks like the teacher failed, okay, because there's no one else in the sentence, and we might presume, as in the first sentence, we presume it was John who was doing the studying. We might presume in the second sentence that it was the teacher that failed. So that's an ambiguous sentence, and it is best avoided. You have to be very careful with this structure. Now, one thing you can do is introduce John again into the first part of the sentence. Despite John failing, the teacher was not angry. Okay, then we know that it was John who failed. Some people will write despite John's failing and use that possessive form as well. Okay, so be careful with this structure that there's no ambiguity. We need to know who is responsible for that verb. If there's nobody mentioned with that verb, we presume the subject of the second part must be responsible for the verb. Now here's another structure with despite, with the noun. Quite often we're followed despite with a noun, like despite the rain, we went to the beach. And again, if we want to say it was raining, which is an independent phrase, it functions independently, we need to introduce it with the fact that. Despite the fact that it was raining, we went to the beach. Now, quite often you'll see this structure. Now, people find this very confusing because they see it raining and it doesn't seem to make any sense. Now, what's happening here? We've got despite plus the ing, and as with John failing the exam, we've had to reintroduce it, meaning the weather, because in the second part, we went to the beach. And remember, we were not raining, okay? So that's why we've introduced it there as a subject for that ing form of the verb. That looks a bit strange, but it is correct. Despite it raining, we went to the beach. Now let's have a look at however and see how that works. It was raining, however we went to the beach. You'll see here that however is introducing a second sentence. We have two sentences. It was raining, and however introduces we went to the beach. So you've got however at the beginning of the sentence with a comma. You cannot do this. A lot of people try this structure, but it's incorrect. However does not link two sentences into one. It's not a conjunction like and or but. However shows a connection between the two ideas, but it doesn't connect two sentences into one. So usually you'll see however at the beginning of the second sentence. When you get to higher levels of English, you might see this happen. It was raining. We did, however, go to the beach. It's a little more sophisticated, a little more complex, but some people move the however further into the sentence. But if you're beginning, if you find this kind of thing confusing, leave however at the beginning of the sentence with a comma. But remember, it links the two ideas, but it doesn't link two sentences into one. So, contrasting and concession. We've looked at although and how it's followed by a full clause with a subject and a verb. Despite can be followed by a noun or the ing form of the verb, and if you want to use the full clause, you'll need the fact that structure to introduce the full clause. And however introduces a separate sentence, but it cannot join two sentences together. So I hope that explained it clearly for you. They are quite complicated. If you enjoyed that explanation, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, etc. And I'll see you in the next video.